Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us back after a lunch break. I hope you're all refreshed, replete, rejuvenated, and ready for our next session, which is our panel on empowering farmers and landowners, land managers for cleaner waterways. We've got 4 speakers plus a wonderful chair lined up, so I don't want to take up too much time. So I am going to bring in our chair for this session. For those who know her, she needs no introduction, but here is our fabulous All-Ireland Communications Manager, Joanna Braniff.
Thank you very much, Becca. I'm not sure if that's in a good way or a bad way. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a lovely lunch and I hope you've been enjoying our conference today. As Becca introduced me, I'm Joanna Braniff and I'm the Rivers Trust All-Ireland Advocacy and Communications Manager. So I work on the Ireland team with Mark Horton and Constanza O'Toole, who presented this morning. So thank you for joining us this afternoon for what promises to be a really interesting and informative discussion. We encourage, of course, if you want to ask any questions, please do so. So put your questions into the Q&A function and indicate who you would like your question directed to, and I will address those at the end of the discussion. So I'm joined today on this panel by Rivers Trust members who are working directly on the ground in Northern Ireland, Ireland and Britain, with land managers and farmers to facilitate the installation of nature-based solutions, and that's, of course, including buffer zones. As we've already heard over the course of today, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and we need what I thought was a really nice comment that was made earlier, a mosaic of interventions at a catchment scale, and these need to be working together to both reduce pollution at source and, of course, make space for nature in diverse habitats. But that's a really delicate balancing act because farmers are also trying to run viable businesses and they're under severe pressure on all fronts. So our panelists that we're going to be speaking to today are doing an incredibly important job, not only delivering these interventions, but also, and I use the word advisedly, selling our vision to farmers so that they will trust us enough to work with us, not just for their own farm sustainability, but also to deliver benefits now and for the future for all of our society. So I'm really pleased to introduce, we've got a fantastic panel here today, and I'm going to ask them to tell you a bit about the work that they do and also to give you a sense of the catchments that they're working in, the pressures on water quality and what they are doing to empower farmers to embrace water-friendly farming. So first on our panel today, we have Jim Bliss. He is an independent consultant at Blissfully Wild. He was formerly the estate manager at Lowther Estate in Cumbria before undertaking a Nuffield farming scholarship. Upon returning to the UK in January, he started a consultancy business called Blissfully Wild, and that's to help more projects in Cumbria and across the UK deliver nature recovery on farms through environmental project delivery and species reintroductions. And I know from speaking to Jim yesterday, he also comes from a family farming background, so he can give insight on both sides of this. Also on our panel today, I welcome another one of my team members from the All-Ireland team, and that's Freya Connolly, who's recently joined the Rivers Trust as a peatland polluticulture officer, and she's working in County Mayo in Ireland with the River Moy Trust. Under the EU Buffer Plus project that Constanza O'Toole explained more details on this morning. Freya's master thesis was based on a survey she carried out with Irish farmers and landowners on their opinions on the future use of peatlands in Ireland, which is a hot topic, as you can imagine, and Freya's going to tell us a bit more about both the challenges and opportunities that's presenting to her in Mayo. So she's currently working with private landowners to create a demo site showing basically how polluticulture can be carried out and potentially scaled up in Ireland. This also includes a partial re-wetting of peatland and subsequent planting of a variety of crops, which is actually a fairly new concept in Ireland. And again, I'll let Freya explain that in a bit more detail. Also from the Ireland team, I'm surrounded today by comrades and team members. I have Rachael McEldowney, and she's the Agriculture and Land Manager at the Ballinderry Rivers Trust, which is located in County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. She works very closely with farmers to deliver a water-friendly farming scheme to address water pollution at source through cost-effective interventions to protect watercourses. These include creating riparian strips and buffer zones, clean and dirty water separation actions, and installing alternative sources for drinking, such as solar-powered pasture pumps. And we look forward to hearing more about our work on the ground in Northern Ireland. And last but not least, finally on our panel today, we have Becky Owens. Welcome, Becky, who is the Woodland Advisor at the Severn Rivers Trust, and she's currently working on 2 woodland creation projects. And she works directly again with farmers on the ground and also supports farmers to complete grant and scheme applications to support farm business productivity. So I want to welcome you all to the panel today. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing more about your work. So I'm going to start, we've had our introduction, so I'm going to start asking the first question. I'd like to direct the first question at Jim. Jim is in a privileged position because through his work, he gets a real sense of kind of catchment scale and how different interventions impact on each other. And Jim, as part of in our title of our discussion today, we're highlighting the complex economic and legislative landscape that farmers now must navigate. An uncertainty around grant funding, constantly changing legislation. This is obviously making things more difficult. When you're working with farmers, what are their thoughts when it comes to making long-term or even short-term decisions about using what they would consider untried nature-based solutions in what's a very challenging economic and legislative landscape?
Yeah, well, thank you first, everyone, for having me on. It's really good to be here. But it's a great question to raise there, because there is so much uncertainty and across the legislative and economic landscape of farming at the minute. And I think it's something that we can certainly support as independent consultants like myself, and the Rivers Trust more generally can be a real supporting stone to farmers across the UK. And I'm seeing quite a lot of changes in my locality in Cumbria, because we're seeing farmers that are seeing an economic opportunity, really, because of the amount of funding schemes available. They're seeing neighbours change their way of farming to more nature-based solutions. And then there's a really interesting mindset change then. What I'm starting to see on the farms that I'm working with is actually farmers becoming aware of the environment around them and potentially how degraded it is. So then their secondary motivation is actually the environmental benefit that they're bringing on. So maybe when they changed, first and foremost, it was they saw an economic uplift in terms of the funding that they could get through these schemes, but then they're actually seeing the reason why the schemes are being pushed out across the countryside for the environmental benefit, which I think is a really, really interesting way to look at it, that suddenly farmers are seeing that benefit to the environment, and they're also seeing the final link, which is actually farming is in these marginal areas, which is generally where I work. Farming is much better working in harmony with nature than against. Generally, this is reducing their costs, so they can actually increase their profits. It's leading to a much more, what I would see as an overall sustainable way of farming.
And that's a really interesting point that you make there, that sometimes people need to see the proof of the interventions, and then is that encouraging for other farmers then when they see the successes from people who are taking part in the schemes? Does word kind of spread locally?
Yeah, word certainly spreads. Sometimes it's not always positive words, but it certainly spreads, and generally it is a positive. They're generally seeing incredible results for the economic situation, the farmers' lifestyle changes. They've actually suddenly got more time to diversify their business into new income, whether that's tourism, whether it is these schemes, or whether it's forestry, or whether it is a different type of farming landscape, looking at rare breed species perhaps. But it is certainly, it has this snowball effect. And I think linking into the Rivers Trust, that's where it's such an exciting thing to have a strong relationship, because suddenly you can call upon all these case studies across the catchment, whichever catchment we're working in. Personally, for me, it's the Eden Rivers Trust that I work with closely. And you can call upon amazing case studies to give farmers a bit more certainty and support, so they actually know what's going to happen, instead of just saying, I think this is probably the reality. They can actually see it in the flesh, which is what most farmers are really wanting in this day and age.
That's a fantastic point you make there. And just to pick up what you're saying about whilst there's challenges, there's opportunities, and farmers are now seeing an opportunity to increase their farm sustainability and diversify to adapt to, particularly with climate impact. I'm going to go to Freya. next on this because, you know, this is an area that you have a lot of expertise in. And, you know, like farmers everywhere, Irish farmers obviously face the same challenges. And we know from personal experience here what the weather's like in Ireland kind of generally, but particularly over the last, 18 months, we have seen unprecedented, like our food is actually, sources are actually being challenged at the moment just because of how wet it's been. So when it comes to empowering farmers to take control and adapt to this rapidly changing environment, like extreme weather, what information and support are you providing to them about farming on restored bog and peatland and how this can improve sustainability for them?
So yeah, as you said yourself, there's a massively increased amount of flooding. You know, like everyone here would have heard about it in some capacity where they live. I'm based in the west of Ireland. My project is in the west of Ireland, and if you don't know, its main characteristic is that it rains an awful lot. So it's a big issue for the farmers that I deal with consistently, and it's what we've ended up having to talk about a fair bit during site visits. We're just after coming out of a very wet winter and spring, which has led to this widespread flooding as well. What I'm trying to show farmers and landowners in regards to peatland is that managing these types of soils and the water table level beneath it can actually assist in mitigating that issue on, say, their adjacent fields close to these waterways as well. Contrary to popular belief, because that is kind of initially what I'm faced with a lot of the time. I noticed that more so during my thesis when I was doing the survey that you mentioned beforehand. There was a lot of pushback on that. And there was just a lot of kind of generalizations that were made on it. And so it's just kind of realigning their minds and kind of giving them the information. And giving them the information is kind of key for me. So while my project is to create this shop window of polluticulture crops on one person's land, my wider personal goal for this project is to engage with as many interested parties as I can, so that they can feel informed and encouraged to make these practices, to change these practices and make these practices on their peatlands. There's such a wide variety and a vast amount of information, nationally and internationally, on this topic. And projects, there's a swathe of projects that you could be part of, but there's just no, it's incredibly hard to source them. Even myself trying to research grants to kind of encourage farmers to get in on this practice, it's actually really hard to find them. You really have to go digging for them. And that's all well and good for me. That's my 9 to 5. These people have their own livelihoods to think about. And on top of all of that, it can be very overwhelming. And I don't blame someone for wanting to dismiss it. So that's what my aim is.
Do you think, as well, as we kind of touched on there, you know, and we're probably maybe in a slightly more privileged position than maybe other people who are listening in, but, you know, given the kind of the history and the relationships of farming to bogland, particularly peatland in Ireland, we touched on earlier about legislative complexities and constantly changing legislation. You know, are you finding it's difficult to kind of build trust with farmers because they've been over maybe the last, 50, 60 years, they've been given contrast and information that tends to kind of work against each other. So when it seems like a new idea to them when you go along. Yeah,
no, I completely agree. You can go back just a handful of years and it's gone from cutting the peat to reclaiming it into grassland, to selling it on to grow trees on it, non-native trees. And now all of a sudden, since like the late 90s, it's just taken a sudden twist in the opposite direction. And it's just kind of caused a lot of confusion and a lot of pushback with farmers. And it, once again, makes sense.
Well, what we'll do is we'll come back again, because I would like again for you to touch on how the polluticulture, you know, will help sustainability. But I'd like to bring in Rachael, because you're working in Northern Ireland, sharing similar weather to Freya, and you know, you're working with Northern Ireland farmers and as we touched on earlier about Lough Neagh, in a catchment that's been identified as contributing nutrient runoff into Lough Neagh. which is fueling the blue-green algae crisis, which of course made global news last year and it looks like it's on its way back again this year. And that has really put farmers in the firing line here, Rachael, in Northern Ireland, as you know, because a lot of the blame has been laid at their door. So you know, there's complications in the catchment that you're working in. So given the range of kind of pressures on farmers and their key role in our work to address pollution and support biodiversity, do you find it difficult to initially engage farmers and gain their trusts? And as we touched again on in an earlier session, do you think the non-regulatory status of the Rivers Trust is important? And also, what other support are you providing beyond the kind of farm actions and guidance on funding applications are you finding yourself having to provide?
Yes, Joanna, it is difficult when, you know, in the early days, whenever we were delivering our scheme, which looks at water quality improvement measures on farms, as Jim touched on earlier, the farmers might spark their interest with the economic benefit to them. So what you'll find is any of the farmers that initially comes into the scheme or is willing to work with us are looking at those sort of high ticket items on the farm, the improving the spout and the concrete, putting in drainage, maybe roofing over their manure store, their silage storage. But what you might find then in the following year, they'll come back, and as Jim had said, they'll be sort of more looking at it from a different point of view, an environmental point of view. And I found myself coming back to a farm a year or two later, and they've said, oh, you know, I'm interested in tree planting now, or I'm interested in something else, and I'm sort of taken aback by it. But sort of a lot of what we've relied on here in our catchment has been word of mouth with farmers. And as you said yourself, that non-regulatory approach is really what it comes down to. Quite often when we come onto a farmyard and they see anything associated with rivers, you know, in years gone by, farmers have always associated the word rivers as being negative and somebody that's out to get them. So a lot of times we've had to say, we're here in a non-regulatory capacity. Whatever we see today are things that we want to help you improve on. And I always give a good example, and it's no disrespect to the Environment Agency officers here in Northern Ireland, but often when they are going out to a farm to look for pollution, it ends up where single farm payment has maybe been reduced. They've been faced with a penalty or taken to court, but there's actually been no solution to the problem. And it's a very reactive approach, whereas I think we come from a much more proactive approach in that we see the problem, we say, we're not going to phone it in. Here's how we would recommend that you fix that problem, and here's funding towards fixing it. So a lot of times we are received more positively because we're non-regulatory. And then each year, as a farmer gets work done on their farm, it builds that trust and builds that relationship. But yes, I think sort of in the last maybe 6 months, because of what's happened in Loughney last summer, I'm finding myself now when I'm going on to a lot of farms, it's the topic of conversation. You know, they're aware that they're playing a part in it, but they're also aware that by entering into a scheme with us, they're part of the solution to that problem. And, you know, we're very lucky that we are able to get funding just in our catchment, but there are quite a few catchments that drain into Loughney. And, you know, to really tackle the problem, it might be that every catchment needs farm advisors on the ground like us delivering a similar scheme.
And, you know, just kind of on that point, this might be a bit left field since we're talking about buffer zones, but, you know, I think you're providing a bit of an emotional kind of buffer zone as well, and addressing sometimes mental health issues when you go onto the farms, that it has become that extreme, really. So as farm advisors in your journey of building trust with farmers, because as we've talked about, you know, we're asking farmers to let us go onto their land and to work with us. And has that been an important factor in terms of building trust with farmers, that you're looking at the issues on their farm holistically?
Definitely. You know, we often joke in here among our team, we know everybody in the family's name. We even know the farmer's dog's name because we're going back and we're building up that trust with them. But I have seen, you know, maybe I'm going on to a yard and say it's the first person that farmer's spoken to in 3 or 4 days. They want you there more so just to have a chat.
Yeah.
Just to talk about everything that they're facing, because they're under an awful lot of pressure at the minute. And it is about providing that support. And they're even talking about issues that I might not be able to help them with. You know, TB is a very big thing over here. And, you know, some farmers have really broke down emotionally with me and said, please, can you help us and support us in some way? And, you know, we've been very glad that we've received training from rural support here in Northern Ireland, and we have that service that we can recommend the farmer onto. But no, when you build and form a relationship with somebody and you see them more and more and you're going back to the farm, you're seen as more than you know, somebody from a professional capacity. You're seen as much more personal to them.
Really important to keep the human factor at the center of this, which is difficult because of course we're working at these huge scales with huge problems and lots of kind of figures and data and numbers involved in it, but this very much delivering these sorts of schemes is very much about the human connection. So thank you for giving us your insight into that. And Becky, I'll come to you now. I suppose maybe on a similar theme, and to pick up from what we've heard from a previous presentation about how buffer zones need to be well designed, they need to be a certain size, you know, for them to be effective. And the ethos of the Woodlands for Water project is planting the right tree in the right place. And we've already heard, as I said, the importance of these well designed buffer strips for them to be effective. But this often means, you know, do farmers feel like they're losing land? If you're asking them to put in, we've heard like 20 meters seems to be an effective size. And as I'm sure Rachael kind of pick up on as well here, with our farmer schemes, they're kind of measuring, you know, every kind of foot of land counts to them. So Becky, what do you think is the best way to get farmers to think differently about this and using land in a different way? What's your experience of that?
Right, I'll just, I suppose, give you a bit of background of the Woodlands for Water project. There's a few pathfinder areas sort of across the country for that, focusing on the team catchment within the Severn in the south. And as part of that, we're helping landowners apply for the Forestry Commission's UCO grant scheme, English creation of that. So I suppose first thing to say is like the financial incentive to take that area out of production. Like there's good grant schemes available now. With UCO specifically, there's sort of additional contributions that can be sort of combined and stacked up with delivering different benefits. So whether that's sort of like your riparian buffers and but like for nature recovery, reducing flood risk, all these extra payments all sort of stack on top of each other, as well as being like a maintenance payment then for 15 years. So I'd say like the financial incentive is quite important, and as well as additional to that is the additional income that can be generated as well. So when you think about sort of planting the trees next to watercourses, you can think future thinking of like timber, wood fuel, carbon as well. If it's a large enough scheme, then you can register it for the carbon credits, and you can manage that for the sort of future projects that can be used on and around the farm. So you know, farmers that have used their own timber off the farm for like doing their own fencing works, for instance. So it's making sure, I think, that there's added value to that land and that buffer. So it's, as well as doing all the environmental benefits, you know, it's acting as that buffer. It's helping reducing the flood risk. It's like increasing infiltration. All those positive things. It's also having like an additional income benefit as well to the landowner. And I think it's as well using like some of these grant schemes as well. There's some practical barriers that can be overcome by using the grant scheme. for instance, like if you want to thinking about excluding livestock from the watercourses, to making sure that there's funding available then to think about having like a drinking trough and that alternative supply. So it's unlocking that funding potential, I think, as well as a big part of it. And sometimes it makes practical sense as well. So I've been out on sites where the old fence line are next to the watercourses, where the watercourse has moved over time. It's undercut that fencing, so you've just got the fencing sort of dangling in the air, sort of thing. So it's the practical sense then is well, there's no point in putting that fence back where it was, sort of thing. You need to make it wide and future-proof it for when that watercourse moves in future. So there's aspects like that as well to consider.
Yeah, and you know, the message is very much coming across, and maybe come back to Jim on this, because as we've said, you have a kind of, you know, catchment wide view of this. It seems to start, all of you are kind of saying, with the journey for the farmer, it tends to come in from a very practical aspect from the farmer, in that he or she is looking to see how they're going to improve their business, how they're going to increase their sustainability, how they're going to cut their costs, because again, water-friendly farming offers opportunities for people to reduce their costs. But then as they kind of go on their own journey through this, they see the benefit. But Jim, can you tell us a bit from your work, you know, how that works across the catchment? I know that you're very focused on you know, reintroducing biodiversity into areas, and again, that can be a bit of a hot topic issue, like the planting of the trees, or the re-wetting or the restoration of the bogs. How do we kind of bring farmers with us to see this big picture from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to support, and I suppose it links into what everyone said, Rachael, Freya, and Becky. It's giving the farmers guidance and support to give them certainty that it is a sensible business choice. That's what we've got to remember. Quite a lot of these, it's a farming business. It's also a lifestyle, but it is a business that they've got to make an income from. And what I'm seeing on the farms, I'm just thinking back to an example that I was with last week, and they said we're just fed up of farming a wet corner of the field. And I think now farmers are starting to realize that actually they don't have to continue to do that. There's now other support mechanisms to allow them to put that field arguably out of food production, but actually it's benefiting the public goods sector much more than it ever was producing food in the past. And I think now they're seeing that there's not only environmental rewards, but there's actually quite a lot of financial gain that they can get from that. And the knowledge of these funding schemes is where they just purely do not have the time to have that knowledge. Most farmers are busy all year round. And I think that's where the excellent support of people like myself and yourselves, with the wonderful National Rivers Trust, but also the more local ones as well, they're brilliant at bringing in this expertise in funding that farmers would not have the time or maybe the interest to actually do, but they would be interested in helping out their farming. That's kind of how I describe it to most of my clients, is this is actually going to help your farming situation. We're making it a lot easier for you. We're reducing the pressure on the land that shouldn't be farmed, allowing you to concentrate your maybe productive farming in the more sensible areas. And that links into these buffer zones and everything, I suppose.
Yeah, and Freya, if we just go back to you, if you could sort of briefly explain, picking up what Jim has said and what Becky has said there about with polluticulture, how a buffer zone can provide a financial opportunity for like a viable kind of, you know, scalable opportunity for farmers to make money off land that at the moment may be just a problem for them.
Yeah, sure. So as you said earlier, it's a work in progress, polluticulture. Like farming on bogs or like wetlands, as in theory has been around for centuries, but using it as a sustainable farming practice has kind of only been around for the past maybe 20 years or so, coined by like some a German group. It can be incredibly profitable. It's all very much within kind of the research realm right now, but there are a couple of crops that can really neatly fill in a gap that's currently very open right now. Say, for example, part of the study actually with Buffer Plus, now not with us, with a different partner, is with sphagnum moss as a replacement for peat in potting soils for horticulture. It can be done kind of in a household scale or larger. Ideally, the larger horticultural scale is what they're aiming towards. And it can be farmed on peat soils in a really sustainable way, because sphagnum is a naturally occurring moss on peat soils, on healthy peat soils, I should say. And it's harvested every 2 years. You don't actually have to cause any damage to the soil by harvesting it, and you can grow it consistently. There are multiple other crops with amazing, really innovative inventions coming from it, like bulrushes, like as Joanna has said to me before, an absolute pest for most gardens. Is it can make amazing things, replacement for plywood.
Puffer jackets, as we recently discovered.
Yeah, you can fill puffer jackets with the tops of bulrushes. That's kind of your more out there ideas. They're your ones that are really innovative, pushing boundaries, and could be a really great larger scale market. On a smaller scale, for like in my instance, I'm going to be working with one farmer, so we're looking at smaller scale and potentially building up. So we're looking at things that are a little bit more accessible for farmers. So like you have your berries, blueberries, cranberries, bilberries, which are your native blueberries here, celery, lettuce. There's loads of different kind of food crops you can grow on this soil as well, with minimal interaction with fertilizers. So yeah, I don't have to say that. I have to preface that.
It's working on a number of different levels then, and providing opportunity. I suppose it's an innovative way to engage farmers to kind of think differently about it. A couple of questions that we've had from our audience that I'm going to put to you. First one is for Rachael, and Judith Verdon has asked, what training has Rachael provided in terms of the farm advice? So what training have you had in terms of getting farm advice? It's something that they're keen to do in their own catchment, but not sure how to build up their skills and knowledge. And what's the best advice if you don't come from a farming background? So how do you build up your skills in your job, Rachael?
Hey Judith, thanks for the question. I think training that's widely available to all Rivers Trust staff is the pinpoint training, and I would firstly look at that for you and your team. We actually had Ross Charrington here only a couple of weeks ago, and I've had the pinpoint training myself a couple of years ago, and I thought it was fantastic for understanding sort of the nitty-gritties around how to reduce runoff and sediment from farms. And it covers all things from clean and dirty water separation, slowing the flow of water over land, livestock exclusion, all those things. In terms of how to build up your skills with speaking to farmers, it's a tricky one. I probably have the upper hand in that I am from a farming background. Now, it's not a very big farm, we're just upland sheep farmers, but in training some of our team here, I've always told them, don't overcomplicate it when you're speaking to farmers. You tend to overthink it. You're trying to come across as sounding like you know what you're talking about and being impressive, but really just speak in simple terms. And usually when I land onto a farm and if things are awkward, a simple icebreaker is just talking about the weather and the price of things, and they'll be more comfortable with you. And then usually I say, have you anything you are interested in applying from? And they'll maybe take you to something on the yard. And after looking at that, you could say, well, maybe let's go look at some of your fields now along your water course, and you take it from there. But don't overwhelm them with too much information or too much technical knowledge or terminology. Just keep it very simple and straightforward. But I would look into your pinpoint training as well. And there's some brilliant resources on the Rivers Trust website. Some great guides that you can follow as well.
Yeah, Rachel, I think you make a really two great points there, in that we have lots of resources available to people, and I think it's really interesting based on the discussions we've had over the course of the day and the discussions we've had here, that the people skills are as important in engaging farmers as the technical skills are. So you can kind of learn the technical skills, but you have to kind of practice the people skills. And as we were saying, when it comes to any of this work, it's about keeping it very people-centered. I know we have a tendency to think solution-based data and stuff, but it always starts with the relationship between individuals, whether it's a Rivers Trust farm advisor and a farmer, or it's all about those kind of human relationships. And I think that's a really important lesson for us to take away from the whole discussion today. And thank you very much for your answer there, Rachel. And maybe this is one we can kind of open to everybody, and it's on that line. So Vicky Whitworth from Kitbrook River Restoration Project in East Devon. It's a community-led project, and they're talking about how important farm advisors are. But they're saying, and we know this from our own experience, they're like unicorns, our farm advisors. They're very hard to kind of recruit. And for everybody, do you have any advice to give the Kitbrook River Restoration Project in terms of finding farm advisors and how you pay for them? How do you get kind of funding to pay for a farm advisor? Maybe Jim, would you have any kind of knowledge on that? Was that something you would cover in your consultancy work?
It's not something I particularly cover. Obviously, I would jump at the chance to be an advisor to a local Rivers Trust, but South Devon is a bit far away from me. But certainly, I think what farmers really, I'm just thinking to some of the really good local farm advisors that we've got, and they're people that are coming from farm, and kind of as Rachel was saying, that they're speaking the right language. We're pretty sometimes us farmers are a pretty fickle bunch, and it's speaking their language that is crucial to get across. And I think if you are looking for someone to be a farm advisor, I would really enhance that farm part of that title. Really, it's a crucial aspect. But yeah, not too much experience in that world, I'm afraid.
Yeah, as I say, I think it definitely is. It's about people skills as much as the kind of the technical skills. So I have another question, Becky, for you this time. This is a kind of technical question, but also one that I think that you might need to kind of encourage optimism when you hear this question. So Daniel Davis is saying, Becky, and others, of course, as well. One challenge of creating buffers in the upper reaches of rivers, the Severn in their case, is likely to be the frequency and severity of flooding. It will sweep away fencing and newly planted trees. And Daniel, would be interested to hear from anyone with experience or advice on doing this.
I suppose it's to design your fencing. So it's actually to do like the wire fencing or temporary electric fencing, or something that's easy to take down or won't get swept away in case of flooding, or some of the overhangs use of your post and rails and things like that. So I think it's just being mindful of areas where it does flood, is just proofing against that. I found tree planting, I think as long as you get the trees in the ground and they get them growing well, they help sort of stabilize your plants, and they'll help with sort of like infiltration for water, and all those sorts of things as well. That sort of answer that question.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have any experience in that? In tree planting?
The only thing I would probably raise with the idea that these natural flood management techniques are vulnerable to washout, shall we say. I think that I would have to highlight my sort of other side of what I do, which is species reintroduction. There are obvious species out there that do this work for us. They do, and this is the projects that I've done beaver reintroductions on. It's one of the biggest wins. If there is a high rainfall event and there is a serious deluge, and we do see some of their dams washed out, they just rebuild them. And maybe that's the sort of thing that we can actually start to see as a, and we are seeing it across the whole UK now with the benefits that beavers are bringing to catchment and these flood mitigation events or dams that they put in. That is the resilience that these animals can bring, and arguably they do it a lot better than what we could ever do. So that's all I would say. It's very expensive to restore natural flood management, but there is an animal out there that does it for us.
That's what I was going to say. You have unpaid workers literally on the ground waiting for their opportunity for this to happen. And I know, Rachael, you know, we've had experience with a study that's been done with the University of Ulster using LiDAR data on riverbanks to identify weak spots that are liable to collapse. Now it's kind of in its early stages at the moment, but it's certainly very exciting, and it's produced some fascinating data on the amount of land lost to washout and flooding, which is very interesting to farmers. As soon as you bring up that topic, everybody's very interested in how to stop their land from washing away. So I think it can be a combination of very futuristic technologies and very old technologies in terms of, you know, there's from satellites to beavers here in terms of doing this. So again, there's a lot of solutions. Now we don't have much time left, so I'm going to give our panelists 1 minute basically to sum up on what they think in their opinion and their experience is the most empowering thing that we as the Rivers Trust can offer farmers. And I'll start with Freya.
So I think it's a topic we've covered quite extensively in this session, and I know this is cheesy, but knowledge is power in this regard. But the way in which it's shared to different groups is so important, because it can end up being more of a barrier and a deterrent than anything else. So I think it's very important that in order to actually use this knowledge, we need to impart it in a way that's actually going to be retained and absorbed. And it's not going to sound condescending. It's not going to sound like you're talking down to someone. You need to get on someone's level. And I think it was Rachael mentioned the language aspect of that. And I think that's very important.
So not that I'm biased or anything, but it's all about the comms here, really, isn't it? You know, when it
Oh,
comes.
guaranteed. We'd be nothing without you.
I tell you that every day, sure. Becky, same question to you. Can you give us one quick, what would be your one piece of advice, one piece of empowerment for farmers we can provide?
Yeah, I'd say to approach things with open minds. I found from like doing my woodland creation schemes, like as you work through the process, like designs and ideas kind of evolve. And just to say that people on the ground, such as ourselves, that are passionate about the environment and we want to do our best for it. So we'll get you through that process. It might seem overly complicated and overwhelming, but there are people out there to help do it and get you through that process.
That's very positive, very optimistic. Jim, same question to you. One piece of empowerment that we can give farmers?
I think it's all about celebrating success on farms and taking that to other farmers and saying, look what we've done. Can we help you? So sharing your success across other farms.
And showing the evidence through successful projects, spreading the word by on the ground action as well as kind of lobbying. And Rachael, last but not least, what's your one piece of advice, your one piece of empowerment that we can give farmers?
Well, each of the other panelists have put forward very, very good points. Probably the one thing for me would be letting farmers know that as advisors, we're here to listen. A lot of times people in our positions can come onto a farm and the farmer can look at us as somebody that's telling them what to do. And we know better than them type of thing, but oftentimes you have to stand back and listen to the farmer. They'll tell you things you could never find online or in a book about how their land's been impacted by the river or what's happened on their farm. You'll find all that from listening to a farmer, and it's about knowing what questions to ask and just working with them and listening to what they have to say.
That's brilliant, Rachael. Listen, thank you so much to our panel. I think we've covered a diverse range of topics there. We've learned an awful lot. Your insights have been fantastic. I hope the audience have enjoyed the insights that you provided. If you have the opportunity and you're staying on and you can respond, unfortunately we didn't get through all of the questions, but if you have the opportunity to respond in the chat of the questions, that would be fantastic. So I want to thank our panel, I want to thank the audience, and of course our conference organizer today, Rebecca. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks to all our panelists there. A lot of really, really useful information, and just a reminder of kind of one of the real essentials. If we are going to get river buffers further off the ground or into the ground, as it were, then farmers and land managers are absolutely crucial to that mission. I don't want to delay our little afternoon tea break anymore, so I will wrap things up there. But thanks again to you all, and audience, I will see you again in 15 minutes for our final panel session of the day. Thanks.